I'm 72 years old now, and folks my age know something the young haven't learned yet. Sometimes the worst day of your life turns out to be the best gift you ever received. Pull up a chair, friend. Let me tell you about the day my mother arrived in Silver Creek, Montana, with nothing but a battered valise, my twin sister, and me clutching to her chest in the middle of a November snowstorm. It was 1885, and the Northern Pacific Railroad had just pushed through our corner of Montana territory. The tracks brought everything: timber barons, cattle ranchers, dreamers, and women like my mother, Grace Sullivan, who'd answered an advertisement in a Boston newspaper promising a fresh start in the West. She was 24 years old that day, standing on the platform at Silver Creek Station with 6-month-old twins in her arms. My sister Lily and I were bundled in blankets so thick you could barely see our faces, but the cold still found us. Montana winter doesn't care about blankets or prayers or desperate hopes. It cuts right through to the bone. The wind howled across that platform like something alive and angry, driving snow sideways until you couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. The train that had carried us from Boston sat steaming on the tracks, its whistle cutting through the storm one last time before it would continue west without us. Final stop, the conductor had called. Silver Creek, Montana territory. End of the line. Grace had spent every penny she had left in the world on 3 tickets west. Her husband, Michael Sullivan, had died in a factory accident in Boston 7 months before Lily and I were born. A steel beam had fallen during construction of a new textile mill. 3 men died that day. Michael left behind a pregnant wife, mounting debts, and nothing but a gold wedding band that Grace still wore. His death left her with creditors knocking on the door of their cramped apartment in the Irish Quarter. No family to turn to. Her parents had succumbed to typhoid the year before, both gone within a week of each other. Her brother Patrick had fallen at Gettysburg during the war. His body never recovered from that blood-soaked field. Her younger sister had died in childbirth 2 years past. Grace was alone in the world except for the 2 babies growing in her belly. She'd taken in sewing work, ruining her eyesight by lamplight to earn enough for rent and food. But after Lily and I were born 6 weeks early, tiny and struggling, she couldn't work the long hours anymore. The debts piled up. The landlord threatened eviction. She sold everything: furniture, clothes, Michael's tools, her mother's china that had come all the way from County Cork. Finally, down to her last few dollars, she'd seen the advertisement. It was a Sunday, and she'd bought a newspaper to scan the Help Wanted section, hoping to find domestic work that might allow her to keep the babies with her. But her eyes had caught on a different section entirely: matrimonial advertisements, dozens of them. Men out west seeking wives. Most were crude or desperate. Cowboys wanting someone to cook and clean with no pretense of romance. Miners looking for any woman willing to live in a tent. But one stood out, printed in neat block letters that suggested education and refinement. Established banker seeks respectable Eastern widow for marriage. Position offers stability and good standing in growing Montana township. Preference for woman of character and domestic capability. Inquiries to Mr. Clayton Hartwell, Silver Creek, Montana territory. She'd read it a dozen times before allowing herself to believe it might be real. A banker, stability, good standing, respectability, everything she needed to give her children a chance at life. She'd written that very evening, her hand shaking slightly as she formed the words. She'd been honest, painfully so. Recently widowed with infant twins, no family, no prospects, but educated, capable, willing to work hard to build a good home. His reply had come within 2 weeks. The envelope was thick, expensive paper that felt substantial in her hands. Inside, 3 pages written in confident script. Dear Mrs. Sullivan, I was moved by your letter and circumstances. A woman of your obvious character and determination would be most welcome in Silver Creek. Our town is growing rapidly with the arrival of the railroad, and I believe you would find it a suitable place to raise your children. The position of my wife would include management of a comfortable household and participation in the social life of our community. I look forward to further correspondence. They'd exchanged letters for 6 weeks. His grew warmer with each one, painting pictures of Silver Creek as a prosperous township with a bright future. He described his position as president of the town's only bank, his comfortable home on Main Street, his standing in the community. He wrote of wanting a wife to share his success, to help him build something lasting. In her second letter, Grace had been explicit. She would not deceive him. Recently widowed with twin infants, 6 months old, a boy and a girl. They were her life, her responsibility. Any man who married her would be taking on a ready-made family. His response had been understanding, even enthusiastic. Children are a blessing, Mrs. Sullivan. A home needs the laughter of young ones. I assure you your circumstances do not diminish my interest. Rather, they speak to your strength of character that you would be forthright about such matters. So Grace had sold everything that remained. The wedding band, finally, though it broke her heart. Her mother's silver hairbrush, the last tangible reminder of the woman who'd raised her. The few pieces of clothing she didn't absolutely need. She kept only what could fit in a single trunk, 2 dresses for herself, swaddling, and blankets for the babies, a few precious items she couldn't bear to part with. The rest of her small savings went to 3 train tickets. Second class, because she couldn't afford first, but not immigrant cars either. She had her pride, what little remained. The journey had taken 4 days, Boston to Chicago, Chicago to Bismarck, Bismarck to Silver Creek on a local line that stopped at every tiny settlement along the way. 4 days of coal smoke and rattling tracks and sleepless nights trying to keep 2 babies quiet in a crowded car. 4 days of fear and hope warring in her chest. She'd read Clayton's letters again and again during the journey, drawing strength from his promises. A comfortable home, security for her children, a respected position in a growing community. By the time the train pulled into Silver Creek Station, she'd memorized every word. The reality of Silver Creek, when she finally saw it through the frost-covered window of her passenger car, looked nothing like the prosperous township Clayton had described in his letters. Main Street was a single muddy thoroughfare, frozen now into ruts and ridges. Wooden buildings lined both sides, most of them raw lumber, not yet weathered gray. A general store with a false front trying to look grander than it was. A saloon from which rough laughter spilled even at midday. A small church whose white paint was already peeling. A hotel that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. But Grace had come too far to turn back now. She had no money for return passage, nowhere to return to, even if she did. This was her chance, perhaps her only chance, to give Lily and me a future that didn't involve a tenement apartment and grinding poverty. She gathered us carefully, 1 baby in each arm, and made her way to the door of the passenger car. The conductor, a grizzled man whose beard was white with frost, helped her down the steep steps. "Careful now, ma'am," he said, his voice kind despite the rough exterior. "Ice under that snow." Grace's boots, thin-soled things made for Boston sidewalks, slipped slightly as she stepped onto the platform. She caught herself, tightening her grip on us instinctively. The cold hit her like a physical blow. She'd thought Boston winters were harsh, but this was something else entirely. This was cold that made your lungs ache with every breath, that found every gap in your clothing and exploited it mercilessly. The platform was crowded despite the weather. In a town the size of Silver Creek, the arrival of the twice-weekly train was entertainment enough to draw a crowd. 50 people at least, maybe more. Women in heavy wool coats, their faces half hidden by scarves. Men in worn work clothes, cowboys by the look of them, stamping their feet against the cold. Children darting between the adults, their breath puffing white clouds. All of them turned to watch as Grace stepped down with her babies. She scanned the crowd, looking for the man who'd described himself in his letters. 42 years of age, of average height, with brown hair graying respectably at the temples, a man of substance and standing. A tall figure pushed through the crowd, well-dressed in a wool coat that looked expensive even to Grace's untrained eye. Beneath it, a suit of fine dark cloth, a watch chain glinting gold across his vest. His hair was indeed brown with silver at the temples, carefully pomaded and parted. His face was clean-shaven, showing a strong jaw and thin lips. But it was his expression that made Grace's heart sink. His eyes, when they landed on the bundles in her arms, went cold. His mouth tightened. His entire body language shifted from approach to withdrawal, even as he continued walking toward her. "Mr. Hartwell?" Grace forced her voice to remain steady. Lily was starting to fuss against her shoulder, cold and uncomfortable. "Mrs. Sullivan?" His voice was nothing like his letters. Clipped, cold, formal to the point of rudeness. He made no move to assist her, no gesture of welcome. Just stood there, 3 feet away, staring at the babies with barely concealed distaste. Around them, Grace could feel the crowd pressing closer, conversations dying away, curious eyes turning toward this meeting that was already going wrong. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Grace shifted Lily higher, trying to quiet her whimpering. The wind cut across the platform, and I started to cry in response to my sister's distress. "I apologize for the children's fussing. The journey has been long, and they're cold and hungry. You didn't mention children in your letters." The words fell like stones between them, flat, accusatory, final. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. "I most certainly did." In my second letter, I explained explicitly that I was recently widowed with infant twins. "I was very clear about my circumstances, Mr. Hartwell. I would never have undertaken such a journey without being completely forthright." I received no such information. His tone suggested he believed she was lying, that she deliberately deceived him to trap him into marriage. "I agreed to marry a widow, Mrs. Sullivan, a respectable woman to manage my household and represent me properly in social settings, not to take responsibility for another man's offspring, not to become father to bastards." The last word was delivered quietly, but it carried. Around them, gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Grace felt her face burn despite the freezing air. "My children are not bastards," she said, her voice low and fierce. "They were born in wedlock to my late husband, Michael Sullivan, who died before he could meet them. I have marriage certificate and birth records to prove it." "So you claim." Clayton took a step backward, physically distancing himself. "But the fact remains, you arrive here with 2 squalling infants that I knew nothing about. Whether through your deception or some misunderstanding makes no difference to me. The result is the same." Both babies were crying in earnest now, their wails cutting through the cold air. I could feel their distress even in Grace's arms, could sense her heart pounding, her rising panic barely held in check. The stagecoach driver had stopped unloading luggage to watch. The station master stood in his doorway, witnessing this public humiliation. Women were whispering behind their hands. Men exchanged knowing looks. Children stared with wide eyes. "What am I to do then?" Grace's voice came out smaller than she intended. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin. She would not beg, would not cry. Not here, not in front of these strangers who were already judging her. "That's hardly my concern." Clayton's discomfort at the attention they were drawing showed in the tightness around his eyes, but he didn't relent. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew an envelope. "There's a hotel down the street. I'll pay for 2 nights' lodging. After that, you'll need to make other arrangements. Perhaps the church can help you, or you can work out return passage to wherever you came from." He held out the envelope. Grace's hands were full with 2 screaming babies. The envelope hung in the air between them for a long, excruciating moment. Finally, with visible distaste, Clayton leaned forward and tucked it into the top of her trunk, which the conductor had set on the platform beside her. Then he turned on his heel and walked away, just like that. No apology, no explanation beyond his brief, condemning words. He simply walked through the parting crowd as though Grace and her children were a problem he'd already solved by throwing money at it. Grace stood frozen on that platform. Around her the whispers grew louder. Shameful! Tried to trap him, obviously. What kind of woman drags babies across the country like that? Poor Mr. Hartwell. Imagine if he'd married her without knowing. Those children. What will become of them in this cold? Grace wanted to scream at them, wanted to pull out Clayton's letters and prove she'd been honest, wanted to explain that she'd had no choice, that Boston held nothing but debts and memories, that she'd been trying to give her children a chance at life. But her throat was too tight. The babies were crying. And even if she could speak, would any of these people believe her over Clayton Hartwell, their respected banker? She bent awkwardly, trying to retrieve the envelope from her trunk without dropping either baby. Her fingers, numb from cold, fumbled with it. Finally got it tucked into her coat pocket. Then she straightened and looked at the crowd, met their stares directly. Let them see that she was not ashamed, that she had done nothing wrong, that she would not be broken by this. A woman pushed through the crowd. She was perhaps 45, with dark hair streaked gray and pulled back in a practical bun. Her coat was worn but well-maintained, her boots sturdy. Her face was weathered by years of Montana sun and wind, but her eyes were kind as they took in Grace and the crying babies. "Everything all right here?" She directed the question to the crowd at large, though her attention was fixed on Grace. No one answered. Several people had the grace to look away, embarrassed at having witnessed and whispered about a stranger's public humiliation. The woman turned to Grace. "Those little ones are near frozen, poor things." Her voice carried the authority of someone used to being heard and heeded. "The hotel Clayton mentioned isn't fit for babies. Drafty old place with thin walls and no proper stove. I'm May Carson. I run the boarding house just up the street. We have a room that would suit you and the children much better." Grace's eyes stung with tears she absolutely would not shed. "Thank you, Mrs. Carson, but I'm afraid I have very limited funds for lodging. We can discuss terms later." May's tone allowed no argument. "Right now, those babies need warmth, and you need food and rest. My son can bring your trunk. Ethan?" A young man of perhaps 17 materialized from the crowd. He had his mother's dark eyes and practical air. He took one look at the situation, nodded once in understanding, and lifted Grace's trunk onto his shoulder as though it weighed nothing at all. May stepped closer. "May I?" She gestured to Lily, who was still crying against Grace's shoulder. Grace found herself nodding, allowing this stranger to take her daughter. May held Lily with practiced competence, immediately checking the baby's extremities for signs of frostbite, even as she made soothing sounds. "Come along, dear." May's free hand touched Grace's elbow gently, guiding her away from the platform and the staring crowd. "Let's get you somewhere warm." Grace followed because she had no other choice, no other plan. Her legs moved automatically while her mind struggled to process the complete disaster her carefully planned future had become. Behind them, the crowd began to disperse, already turning this rejection into the story they'd tell over dinner, over drinks in the saloon, over quilting circles and poker games. That mail-order bride who tried to trick Clayton Hartwell showed up with 2 babies he didn't know about. Can you imagine? Poor man. Lucky he saw through her scheme. May's boarding house was a 2-story structure near the end of Main Street. It had clearly been built with care, the lumber weathered to silver gray but still solid, the windows tight in their frames. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys, promising warmth. Inside, the entryway opened to a sitting room where a fire crackled in a stone hearth. The room was simply furnished but scrupulously clean. A sofa with worn cushions, 2 rocking chairs, a braided rug covering the plank floor. Everything spoke of modest comfort maintained with effort and pride. Warmth enveloped Grace the moment she stepped inside. After the brutal cold outside, the heated air made her face tingle painfully. Lily's cries shifted from distressed wails to fussy whimpers. "Here now." May settled into one of the rocking chairs and began expertly unwrapping Lily from her layers of blankets. "Let's get these wet things off you, sweetheart." Still holding me, Grace felt herself starting to shake now that the immediate crisis had passed, now that there was time to think about what had just happened. "Sit down before you fall down." May's voice was firm, but not unkind. "That chair there by the fire, and hand me the boy, too. You need to get your coat off and warm up." Grace did as instructed, moving like a puppet on strings. May somehow managed both babies with the ease of long practice, checking us over while maintaining a running commentary. "Good color once we get them warm, breathing clear, alert eyes. You've taken good care of them through that journey. Not easy, traveling with infants. How old did you say?" 6 months next week." Grace's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "They were born early. 5 weeks. Very small. But they've grown well. I can see that. Healthy little ones." May had me in one arm now and Lily in the other, both of us finally settling down in the warmth. "And their names?" "Lily and Thomas. We call him Tommy." Grace's throat tightened. "After my husband, Michael Thomas Sullivan. He died in a factory accident 7 months before they were born." May's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss. Losing a husband is hard enough without being left alone with babies on the way." The simple acknowledgement, the lack of judgment or pity, broke something in Grace. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. She brushed them away angrily. "I'm sorry. I don't usually—" "Cry when your whole world falls apart?" May's voice held a hint of dry humor. "Lord, child, if you didn't cry after what just happened, I'd worry about you. Clayton Hartwell showed his true colors today, and they were uglier than a mud fence." Despite everything, Grace felt a small laugh bubble up. It came out more like a sob, but it was something. The front door opened, bringing another gust of cold air and heavy footsteps. A man's voice called out, "May, you here?" "In the parlor, Cole." A man appeared in the doorway, and Grace found herself staring. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that spoke of years of hard physical labor. He wore a leather vest over a work shirt, denim trousers tucked into tall boots. A Stetson hung from one hand, revealing hair the color of dark walnut, threaded with silver at the temples. His face was weathered by sun and wind, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth, but handsome in a rugged way that had nothing to do with refinement and everything to do with strength. But it was his eyes that caught and held Grace's attention. They were the exact color of whiskey held up to lamplight. Amber with depths of gold and brown. Eyes that had seen hard things and learned to be careful about what they revealed. Those eyes moved from May to Grace to the babies, taking everything in with a single sweeping glance. "Back so soon, Cole?" May asked. "I thought you were heading out to the Henderson place." "False alarm." His voice matched his appearance, deep and roughened by years of calling orders across open rangeland. "Nancy Henderson is a first-time mother, nervous about every twinge, but the baby's not coming yet. I rode 5 miles for nothing, but better safe than sorry with birthing." He hung his coat on a peg by the door, and Grace saw the worn leather, the mended tear near one shoulder. Beneath the vest, his shirt was faded from many washings, clean but patched at one elbow. These were the clothes of a working man, not a gentleman rancher who hired others to do his labor. "Cole Maverick," May said, gesturing between them. "He owns the Maverick Ranch, about 5 miles north. Biggest horse operation in 3 counties. Cole, this is Mrs. Grace Sullivan and her twins Lily and Tommy. They've had quite the welcome to Silver Creek." Cole's attention sharpened. "You're the woman Clayton was supposed to meet." It wasn't a question. Of course he'd know. In a town this small, everyone would know by sunset if they didn't already. Grace lifted her chin, met his gaze directly. "I am, or was. Mr. Hartwell decided he wasn't interested in a wife with children." "I heard." Cole's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those amber eyes. "Clayton's a damn fool." The casual profanity, the flat statement of fact, startled a small sound from Grace, not quite a laugh. Cole moved closer, his gaze dropping to the babies May still held. Something crossed his face then. Pain, sharp and deep, there and gone in an instant. His jaw tightened, his hands, hanging loose at his sides, curled into fists before deliberately relaxing. "May I?" He gestured toward me. May looked at Grace, who found herself nodding despite not understanding why. There was something in the stranger's face, in the careful way he was holding himself, that spoke of old grief barely held in check. Cole took me from May with surprising gentleness. His hands, large and calloused and work-roughened, cradled me as though I were made of spun glass. He examined me with a horseman's practiced eye, checking my breathing, the color of my skin, the alertness of my gaze. His thumb, rough with years of rope and leather, brushed gently across my tiny forehead. "Healthy little fellow," he said quietly. "Good strong grip." My hand had found his thumb and wrapped around it instinctively. "Traveled well, considering. You must have taken excellent care of them during the journey, Mrs. Sullivan." The simple acknowledgement of her efforts, the first kindness anyone had shown her since the disaster at the station, made Grace's eyes sting again. "I did my best," she managed. Cole stared down at my small hand wrapped around his thumb. His face had gone very still. Grace saw his throat work as he swallowed hard, saw his eyes grow bright with unshed tears. Then, before Grace could process what she was seeing, a single tear tracked down his weathered cheek. He made no move to brush it away. Just stood there, a grown man, a rancher who probably hadn't cried in years, with tears running silently down his face as he held a stranger's 6-month-old baby. May made a small sound, halfway between a sob and a sigh. "Oh, Cole." He cleared his throat roughly, brushed the tears away with the back of his free hand, blinked hard several times. Then, with visible effort, he gathered himself, straightened his shoulders, took a slow breath. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, his voice carefully steady. "I run a horse ranch 5 miles north of here. 30 head of breeding stock, 6 cowboys in the bunkhouse. I need someone to cook for the men and manage the main house. Position includes accommodation, separate quarters for you and your children, $15 a month, plus room and board." Grace stared at him. "You're offering me employment?" "I am." He handed me back to her carefully, then took a step back, creating distance. "I need help. You need a situation that accommodates your children. Seems our needs align." It was too convenient, too perfect. Grace had learned today that things that seemed too good were usually traps waiting to spring. "Forgive my directness, Mr. Maverick, but why would you offer such a position to a complete stranger? You know nothing about me beyond what you've witnessed in the last 5 minutes. That hardly seems like sound business practice." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I know you kept 2 babies healthy through a 4-day train journey in November. I know you held your head up when Clayton humiliated you in front of half the town instead of breaking down. I know you're asking hard questions instead of jumping at the first offer, which shows more sense than most. And I know May trusts you." He glanced at May, who nodded firmly. "And May Carson's judgment is worth more than 100 references from Boston society ladies." May snorted. "Flatterer? But he's right, Grace. I'm a good judge of character, always have been. And Cole Maverick is the finest man in Montana Territory. His wife Sarah was my dearest friend since we were girls. She'd want him to help someone in need." Wife, past tense. Grace caught it, understood in that moment the source of the tears she'd witnessed. "I'm very sorry for your loss," she said quietly. Cole's face went carefully blank. 3 years ago, scarlet fever epidemic swept through Silver Creek one winter. Took 12 children and 2 adults before it burned itself out. His voice was flat, reciting facts without emotion. "My wife Sarah and our daughter Rosie were among them. She was 5 years old." The words landed like physical blows. Grace looked at this man who'd just cried while holding her son and understood. He'd lost his own child, lost everything that mattered. And somehow seeing Lily and me had cracked open whatever walls he'd built around that grief. "I lost my husband before our children were born," Grace offered softly. "Factory accident. A beam fell during construction. He never knew he'd be a father, never knew it would be twins. They stood in May's warm parlor, two people whose lives had been shattered by loss, considering whether their broken pieces might somehow fit together into something functional, if not whole. The silence stretched. Finally, Grace spoke. "I would need to see the ranch before making a decision, understand the full scope of the duties involved. And I want to be very clear, Mr. Maverick, I won't accept charity, even kindly meant. If I take this position, it will be because I can fulfill the responsibilities, not because you pity me. Wouldn't offer if I didn't need the help." Cole's voice was firm. "I need someone who can manage a household and cook decent meals for working men. My cowboys are threatening mutiny over my attempts at biscuits. Can barely boil coffee without burning it. If you can cook and keep house, you'd be earning every penny of your wage and then some." Grace studied his face, looking for signs of deception or ulterior motives. But his amber eyes met hers steadily, and what she saw there was bone-deep weariness and genuine need. She'd come to Montana planning to marry a stranger based on letters and promises. That plan had exploded in her face. Now here was a different stranger offering a different arrangement: employment instead of marriage, independence instead of dependence, the chance to prove her worth through work rather than hoping for a husband's goodwill. It wasn't what she'd planned, but perhaps it was better. "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Maverick, with the condition that if either of us finds the arrangement unsuitable, we part ways with 2 weeks' notice and no hard feelings." Cole extended his hand. Grace shifted me to one arm and shook his hand firmly. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and dry. His grip was respectful, not crushing, acknowledging her as an equal rather than a supplicant. "We leave at first light," he said. "I'll arrange a wagon for you and the children. 5 miles is too far to ride with infants in this weather. I'll have them ready." Cole nodded once, then retrieved his coat and hat. At the door he paused. "Mrs. Sullivan, you're going to do just fine." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him, leaving Grace standing in May's parlor with her babies and a future that had suddenly, improbably, taken shape again. May was grinning. Well, that was something. What just happened? Grace felt dazed, as though events were moving too fast for her to process. "You just got yourself a job and a home." May stood and carried Lily to Grace, then bustled toward the door. "And I'm going to make you both some supper because you look like you haven't eaten in days. But first, let's get you and these babies properly settled." She led Grace upstairs to a small bedroom where a fire had already been laid in the stove. The room was simple but clean, with a bed covered in a quilted coverlet, a washstand, a rocking chair, and best of all, a cradle. "This was Sarah's," May said softly, running her hand along the cradle's curved edge. "She and I were pregnant at the same time, 23 years ago. My Thomas made 2 cradles, one for each baby. Sarah used hers for Rosie. Then it sat empty in Cole's attic for 3 years. Her voice thickened. "It's good to see it used again." After May left to prepare food, Grace settled both babies in the cradle. They were drowsy now, warm and comfortable, for the first time since the train. She changed their damp clothing, wrapped them in dry blankets, and watched them drift into sleep. Then she moved to the window and looked out over the darkening street of Silver Creek. Lamplight glowed from windows, smoke rose from chimneys. Somewhere a dog barked. The wind had died down, and snow fell steadily now, soft and silent. This morning she'd been on a train, reading Clayton's letters and imagining her future as a banker's wife. Imagining a comfortable home, social standing, security for her children. That future had died on a train platform. But another future had opened in its place, not the one she'd planned, not the safe, conventional path of marriage. Instead, employment, her own wages, the chance to prove herself through work. Grace pulled Clayton's envelope from her pocket and looked at it. Money for 2 nights in a hotel he'd called unsuitable for children. Payment to assuage his conscience for publicly humiliating a woman and 2 babies. She opened the window slightly and dropped the envelope into the snow below, watched it disappear into white. She didn't need Clayton Hartwell's charity, didn't need his 2 nights in a drafty hotel. She had a job. She had a place to stay tonight. Tomorrow she'd see Cole Maverick's ranch and begin building something with her own 2 hands. Grace closed the window and turned back to look at her sleeping children. Lily had her fist in her mouth, sucking contentedly. I had found my thumb and was making small, satisfied sounds. "We're going to be all right," she whispered to them. "Better than all right. We're going to make our own way." And for the first time since stepping off that train, Grace Sullivan believed it. The wagon arrived at May's boarding house just as dawn broke over the eastern mountains, painting the snow-covered street in shades of rose and gold. Grace had been awake for an hour already, feeding the twins and packing her few belongings back into the battered trunk. She'd slept poorly, her mind churning through everything that had happened, everything that might happen. Cole Maverick sat on the wagon seat, reins loose in his hands, his breath and the horse's breath misting white in the frigid air. He wore the same worn coat as yesterday, the same battered Stetson. But in the morning light, Grace noticed details she'd missed before: the careful mending on his gloves, the quality of the leather vest beneath his coat, expensive once though worn now, the silver conchos on his saddle, tarnished but real. This was a man who'd had money and lost it, or had it and didn't care about showing it off. "Morning, Mrs. Sullivan." He climbed down and lifted her trunk into the wagon bed as though it weighed nothing. "Children ready for the ride?" "As ready as they can be." Grace had bundled Lily and me in every blanket May could spare. Mrs. Carson was very generous with her provisions. Indeed, May had pressed on Grace a basket of food, extra blankets, and a jar of something she called sourdough starter. "My mother brought this from Pennsylvania 40 years ago," May had said, cradling the glass jar like it was precious. "Never let it die, not through all the hard times. You feed it flour and water every week, and it'll give you bread forever." Sarah had some from the same batch. After she died, Cole let it go. Broke my heart to see it die with her. May's voice had thickened. "You take this, start fresh, and when you make bread from it, you'll be connected to every woman who kept this alive before you. My mother, my grandmother Sarah, all of us who kept our families fed when times were hard." Now, as Cole helped Grace onto the wagon seat and settled the basket at her feet, she felt the weight of that jar. It was more than flour and wild yeast. It was legacy, continuity, a promise that life went on even after loss. The ride north took an hour. The road, such as it was, wound through open country that took Grace's breath away. Rolling prairie stretched in every direction, white with snow now, but promising endless grass come spring. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks sharp against the pale sky. Here and there, clusters of pine trees broke the monotony, dark green against white. Cole drove in silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable quiet. He kept the horses to a steady walk, avoiding the worst ruts. When Lily fussed, he slowed even more, giving Grace time to settle her. "How long have you had the ranch?" Grace asked finally, needing to fill the silence with something. 17 years. Bought the land when I was 17 myself, fresh off a cattle drive to Dodge City. Worked as a cowboy for 3 years, saved every penny. When old man Patterson decided to sell out and move to California, I borrowed money from the bank and bought his 160 acres. He glanced at her briefly. Built it up from there, bought adjoining parcels when I could. Now it's 5,000 acres, give or take. Not the biggest spread in Montana, but it's mine. Or will be when I pay off the last of the mortgage. 5,000 acres. Grace couldn't imagine that much land. In Boston, her entire world had been a few city blocks. Most of it's grazing land. We run cattle, too, about 500 head. But horses are my real business. Sarah's, too, before she died. We bred quality stock, sold to ranchers, and the cavalry both. His voice softened when he mentioned his wife. Sarah had a gift with horses, could gentle the wildest Mustang, and they'd follow her around like puppies. She started the breeding program. I just kept it going after she died. The words hung unspoken. They created a rise, and there below lay the ranch. Grace's breath caught. The main house was large, 2 stories of weathered gray lumber with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys. The windows, many of them, gleamed in the morning sun. Behind the house stood a massive barn, red paint faded to rust, and beyond that a complex of corrals and outbuildings. Horses, dozens of them, grazed in a large paddock. Their coats, dark against the snow, steamed in the cold air. "It's beautiful," Grace said softly. Cole looked at his ranch like a man looks at something he built with his own hands and isn't quite sure he deserves. Sarah designed the house, drew up the plans herself, insisted on big windows to let in light, said she'd spent too many years in dark rooms and wanted to see the sky. He guided the horses down the slope toward the buildings. Took us 3 years to build it, working every spare minute. Got it finished just before Rosie was born. The house had been built for a family, built for children to run through its rooms, for laughter to echo off its walls. Now it stood half empty, home to one grieving man. As they pulled up to the front porch, the door of the bunkhouse opened, and men emerged. 6 of them, ranging in age from perhaps 20 to past 60. Cowboys, every one of them, with the bow-legged walk and squinted eyes of men who lived in the saddle. The oldest stepped forward. He had a face like tanned leather, white hair under a battered hat, and eyes the color of faded denim. "Mrs. Sullivan," Cole said, "this is Buck Thornton. He's been with me since the beginning. Ranch foreman, and the only man I trust to tell me when I'm being a damn fool." Buck swept off his hat, revealing a completely bald head. "Ma'am, welcome to Maverick Ranch." His voice was gravelly from years of breathing dust and shouting orders. "We're mighty glad you're here. Cole's cooking has been an offense against nature and the Lord both." The other cowboys laughed. Cole's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "The rest of these reprobates," Buck continued, "are Jake, Slim, Red, Charlie, and young Pete. They'll mind their manners or answer to me." 5 hats came off in unison. 5 voices murmured greetings. 5 pairs of eyes looked at Grace with a mixture of curiosity and hope that she might actually be able to cook. Cole climbed down and came around to help Grace from the wagon. His hands on her waist were careful, respectful, lifting her down as though she weighed nothing. Then he reached for the basket that held Lily and me. "Let me see them babies," Buck said, peering into the basket. His weathered face softened instantly. "Lord have mercy, ain't they something?" "How old?" 6 months, Grace said. "Healthy little things, both of them. Twins, Thomas and Lily." Buck's faded eyes found Cole's face. Something passed between the 2 men, some understanding Grace couldn't interpret. "Well," Buck said gruffly, "ranch has been too quiet for too long. Good to have young ones around again." Cole carried Grace's trunk while Buck insisted on carrying the basket with the babies. The other cowboys scattered to their morning work, but Grace felt their eyes following her as Cole led her up the porch steps and through the front door. The inside of the house took her breath away. The entryway opened into a large living area with a stone fireplace big enough to stand in. The ceiling soared 2 stories high, with a balcony running along the 2nd floor. Stairs, wide and solid, led upward. The furniture was simple but well made. A sofa, several chairs, a massive dining table that could seat 12. Everything was clean but had the feel of a place that wasn't really lived in anymore. No clutter, no personal items scattered about, just clean, empty space. "Kitchen's through here." Cole led her through an archway into a room that made Grace's heart sing. A cast-iron stove, massive and beautiful, dominated one wall. Counters ran along 2 others, with cabinets above and below. A hand pump at a deep sink, A larder with shelves full of supplies, windows looking out over the yard, flooding the space with light. Sarah planned this kitchen down to the last detail, Cole said. Wanted room to work, good light, everything within reach. She loved to cook. Past tense. Always past tense. It's wonderful, Grace said honestly. In Boston, she'd cooked on a tiny stove in a room barely big enough to turn around in. This was a dream. Upstairs are 4 bedrooms. Cole's voice was carefully neutral. The master, which I use. A guest room and 2 smaller rooms that were meant for children. Were meant for. Before his children died. One of them was Rosie's, he continued. It's been 3 years, but I haven't changed anything. Thought maybe your twins could use it. The room, I mean. The furniture's sized for a 5-year-old, but there's space for a cradle and changing table, if you're willing. Grace heard what he wasn't saying. He wanted children in that room again, wanted to hear baby sounds instead of silence, wanted to begin healing by letting life back into spaces death had claimed. I'd be honored, she said softly. Cole's shoulders relaxed slightly. I'll show you. He led her upstairs, Buck following with the basket of babies. The second-floor hallway had 4 doors. Cole opened the second one on the left. Grace stepped into a room painted soft yellow with white curtains at the windows. A small bed sat against one wall, covered in a quilt depicting horses. Drawings hung on the walls, child's pictures of horses and mountains and a stick figure family. A shelf held toys, wooden horses, cloth dolls, a set of blocks. Everything exactly as a 5-year-old girl had left it 3 years ago. We can move things if you need to, Cole said quickly. Store the toys, take down the drawings. No, Grace's voice was firm. Leave it all. Lily and Tommy will grow into this room. They'll play with these toys. And someday, when they're old enough, I'll tell them about Rosie. About the girl who had this room before them. Cole turned away, but not before Grace saw his face crumple. His shoulders shook once. Then he straightened, cleared his throat roughly. I'll bring up your trunk, he managed. He left quickly, his boots loud on the stairs. Buck set the basket on the bed gently. You did good, ma'am, he said quietly. He's been carrying that grief alone too long. Needs to let it out, but he's too stubborn. Maybe having you and these babies here will help. The old cowboy left, closing the door softly behind him. Grace lifted Lily from the basket, then me. We were both awake now, looking around with the wide-eyed wonder of babies, seeing somewhere new. She sat in the small rocking chair, one baby on each knee, and looked around Rosie Maverick's room. The morning sun slanted through the windows, dust motes danced in the beams. Outside she could hear cowboys calling to each other, horses nickering, the everyday sounds of a working ranch. This was her home now, not a husband's house where she lived on sufferance. Not charity from strangers. Her home, earned through work, where she would raise her children and prove her worth every single day. Grace began to rock slowly, while Lily and I settled against her chest. We're going to be all right here, she whispered. This is where we belong. The first week passed in a blur of work and adjustment. Grace rose at 4:30 each morning, before the cowboys were up. She learned to manage the massive stove, how to bank the coals at night and coax them back to flame in the morning. Learned that lard made flakier biscuits than butter, that the cowboys expected meat at every meal, that coffee should be strong enough to stand a spoon in. She cooked breakfast for 7 hungry men, biscuits, gravy, bacon or ham, eggs when the chickens were laying, fried potatoes. The cowboys ate like they'd been starved, shoveling food with the single-minded focus of men who did hard physical labor in brutal cold. After breakfast, while the men scattered to their work, Grace cleaned the kitchen and started bread. She'd taken May's sourdough starter and fed it flour and water as instructed, watching in wonder as it bubbled and grew. The first loaf she baked from it filled the house with a smell that made Cole stop in his tracks when he came in from the barn. He'd stood in the kitchen doorway, just breathing, his eyes closed. Sarah used to make bread every Tuesday, he said finally. Same smell, exactly the same. Grace had held her breath, waiting to see if the memory would pain him or comfort him. I'd forgotten, Cole continued, his voice rough. Forgot how much I missed that smell. He'd opened his eyes then, looked at Grace with something like gratitude, and walked away without another word. The twins thrived in their new home. Grace had fashioned a safe play area in the kitchen from a large wooden crate Buck had found, lining it with blankets and positioning it where she could see them while she worked. Lily and I would sit for hours, babbling to each other in the mysterious language twins share, watching Grace move through her tasks. The Cowboys adored us. Tough, weathered men who could break a wild horse or brand a calf without flinching would come in from work and immediately head to wherever the twins were, making ridiculous faces and speaking in voices 3 octaves higher than normal. Buck especially had claimed us as honorary grandchildren. He'd carved wooden rattles from scraps of pine, sanding them smooth as silk so we wouldn't get splinters. Every evening after supper, he'd hold one or both of us, telling long, rambling stories about cattle drives and roundups and the old days. Grace fell into the rhythm of ranch life. Breakfast at 5. Clean up and start bread. Prepare the noon meal for the Cowboys who came in from morning work. More cleaning, laundry on Mondays, mending on Wednesdays. Start supper by 4, so it would be ready when the men finished evening chores. After supper, clean up again, prepare for the next morning, finally collapse into bed near 9 only to rise again before dawn. It was harder work than she'd ever done in Boston. Her hands grew rough from lye soap and hot water. Her back ached from bending over the stove and washtubs. Her arms developed muscles from kneading bread and hauling water. But she'd never been happier. This was honest work, work that mattered. The Cowboys depended on her meals to fuel their labor. Cole depended on her to maintain the home Sarah had designed. And slowly, day by day, Grace felt herself becoming part of something larger than just her own survival. She was building a life here. Cole remained distant but not cold. He ate breakfast with the Cowboys, worked alongside them through the day, ate supper at the big table in the evening. He was unfailingly polite to Grace, thanking her for meals, asking if she needed anything from town, but he kept a careful distance. Never came into the kitchen while she was working unless necessary. Never lingered in conversation. Never touched her except when helping her into or out of the wagon, on the rare trips to Silver Creek for supplies. Grace understood. He was respecting boundaries, making sure she never felt pressured or uncomfortable. After Clayton Hartwell's assumption that a woman's presence implied certain obligations, Cole's careful formality was a gift, but sometimes Grace caught him watching her. She'd turn from the stove and find his amber eyes tracking her movements. Or she'd glance up while setting the table and catch him staring before he quickly looked away. And sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and the twins slept, Grace would lie in her bed and wonder what it would be like if those careful boundaries came down. It was a dangerous thought. She pushed it away firmly every time it surfaced. The second Sunday after Grace's arrival, Cole announced they'd be attending church in Silver Creek. "Don't have to if you'd rather not," he said at breakfast. "But folks will talk less if they see you're respectable, and the pastor's a good man. Might be nice for you to start meeting people properly." Grace's stomach tightened at the thought of facing the town that had watched her humiliation, but Cole was right. She couldn't hide forever. "We'll go," she said. The church was the small white building Grace had noticed from the train platform, its steeple crooked, but its steps swept clean. 20 families filed in, dressed in their Sunday best. Conversations quieted when Cole appeared with Grace and the twins. They took a pew near the back. Immediately, women began whispering behind their hands. Grace heard fragments. Living in his house. No chaperone. Not even married. Shameful. Cole's jaw tightened, but he stared straight ahead, ignoring the whispers. Grace lifted her chin and did the same. The service passed in a blur. Grace barely heard the sermon. She was too aware of eyes on her back, of judgment radiating from the pews around them. Afterward, as people filed out, several women deliberately turned away, when Grace approached. Mrs. Henderson, the nervous first-time mother Cole had mentioned, looked like she might speak but was pulled away by an older woman with an iron-gray bun and a mouth like a trap. "That's Martha Simpson," Cole murmured. "Town busybody. Appointed herself guardian of public morals about 20 years ago. Don't let her bother you." But it did bother Grace. She'd done nothing wrong. She worked for wages, maintained separate quarters, conducted herself with perfect propriety. Yet these women looked at her like she was a scarlet woman. They were making their way toward the wagon when Buck appeared, flanked by the other maverick cowboys. All 6 men had cleaned up for church, their faces scrubbed, their shirts pressed. "Morning, ma'am," Buck said loudly enough for half the churchyard to hear. "Wanted to tell you again how much we appreciate your cooking. Best meals we've had in years. You're a treasure, you are." "Absolute treasure," Jake agreed, equally loud. "Don't know how we managed before you came," Slim added. The other cowboys murmured agreement, forming a protective wall around Grace and Cole. Martha Simpson's pinched face went even tighter. But she couldn't very well criticize a woman 6 cowboys were publicly defending. Grace felt tears prick her eyes at this rough-hewn chivalry. These men barely knew her, but they'd appointed themselves her champions. "Thank you," she managed. "That's very kind." "Ain't kindness," Buck said firmly. "Just truth." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Cole seemed lost in thought, the reins loose in his hands while the horses found their own way home. Finally he spoke. "I'm sorry about that. The whispering. I should have expected it. It's not your fault, isn't it?" He glanced at her briefly. "I brought you into this situation. Offered you a job knowing exactly how it would look to small-minded people." "You offered me a job when I had no other options," Grace corrected. "You gave my children a home, and me a way to support them with dignity. What a few gossips think doesn't change that." Cole was silent for a long moment. "Sarah would have liked you," he said finally. She had no patience for people who worried more about appearances than substance. It was the first time he'd spoken of his wife to Grace directly. She held her breath, afraid any response might make him retreat back into his careful silence. "She sounds like she was remarkable," Grace ventured. "She was." Cole's voice was soft. "Met her at a barn raising when I was 19. She was helping her mother organize the women's food contributions, ordering around women twice her age like a general commanding troops. I took one look at her and knew." Grace found herself smiling at the image despite the sadness of the story. "Took me 6 months to work up the courage to court her properly. Another year to save enough to feel like I could support a wife. Married when I was 21 and she was 19. Had 10 years together before the fever took her. And Rosie? Born a year after we married. Sarah's whole world. Mine, too." His hands tightened on the reins. "She looked just like Sarah. Same dark hair, same eyes that could see right through you. Stubborn as a mule and brave as a lion. She'd climb anything, race any horse, afraid of nothing." His voice thickened. "Until the fever. Then she was just a little girl, burning up, crying for her mama, and I couldn't do a damn thing except watch them both slip away." Grace's own eyes filled. "I'm so sorry, Cole." He blinked hard. "Been 3 years. Should be over it by now. Grief doesn't work that way. It's not something you get over. You just learn to carry it." Cole looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps. The understanding that she knew, truly knew, what it meant to lose someone. "Your husband," he said. "Michael. Did you love him?" Grace thought about that. "I did. Not the wild, passionate love of storybooks. We were young, both Irish immigrants trying to make our way in Boston. He was kind to me. We built a partnership, a friendship. When he died, I lost my best friend." "Do you miss him?" "Every day, but not the way I did at first. Now it's more like a dull ache instead of a sharp pain. And I have the twins. They're his legacy. His life wasn't meaningless because he gave me them." They rode in silence after that, but it was a different quality of quiet. Not careful distance, but shared understanding. That evening, after the Cowboys had eaten and departed, and the twins were asleep upstairs, Grace sat by the fire in the living room, mending one of Cole's shirts. He sat across from her, reading a cattleman's journal, his glasses perched on his nose. It felt domestic, peaceful, like they were an old married couple sharing companionable silence at the end of the day. Grace tried not to think about how much she liked it. "Grace?" Cole's voice startled her from her thoughts. "Yes?" "Would you teach me to hold the babies?" She looked up, surprised. "You've held Tommy before." "Once, for a few minutes, and I near fell apart doing it." He set down his journal. "But I'd like to learn, if you're willing. They're getting bigger, starting to sit up and reach for things. Seems like I should know how to manage them properly." Grace's heart squeezed. This strong, capable man asking permission to hold babies because he was afraid his grief might break him. "Of course," she said softly. "I'll get Tommy." She went upstairs and lifted me carefully from the cradle. I was half asleep, warm and drowsy and content. When Grace carried me down, Cole had moved to the sofa, his hands resting on his knees like he was bracing himself. "Sit back," Grace instructed. "Relax your arms. He can feel if you're tense." Cole did as told. Grace settled me in his arms, adjusting his hold so my head was properly supported. I blinked up at him sleepily, made a small sound. Then, to Grace's astonishment, I smiled. A real smile, not just gas, my whole face lighting up. Cole made a choked sound. His eyes filled with tears that spilled over and ran down his weathered cheeks. "He smiled at me," Cole whispered. "Did you see that?" "I saw. Rosie used to smile like that, like everything was right in her world because her daddy was there." Grace sat beside him on the sofa, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You're allowed to love them," she said quietly. "Loving my children doesn't mean betraying Rosie's memory." Cole looked at her, tears still streaming. "How do you know that's what I'm afraid of?" "Because I'm afraid of the same thing. Every time I feel happy here, every time I laugh or enjoy something, part of me feels guilty, like I'm betraying Michael by moving on. But that's not how love works. Our hearts don't have a limited capacity. Loving new people doesn't diminish what we felt for the ones we lost." Cole stared down at me, at my small hand that had found his thumb again and gripped it tight. "I've been so empty," he said finally. "For 3 years, I've just been going through motions, working myself to exhaustion so I wouldn't have to feel anything. And then you showed up with these babies, and suddenly I felt everything all at once. Pain and joy and hope and fear all mixed together. It scared the hell out of me." "I know," Grace said. "It scares me too." They sat like that for a long time, Cole holding me, Grace sitting beside him, the fire crackling, the wind howling outside. Inside, warmth and light, and the beginning of something neither of them was quite ready to name. Finally, Cole spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment you stepped off that train and refused to cry, even though your world was crumbling." Grace's breath caught. "Cole, you don't have to say anything. I know this is too soon, that you're still grieving Michael, that you came here for employment, not romance. I won't push. Won't even mention it again if you'd rather I didn't, but I needed you to know. You're not just my housekeeper, Grace. You're becoming essential to my life in ways I didn't think were possible anymore." Grace's heart pounded. She should say this was inappropriate, should remind him of boundaries and propriety, should protect herself from the possibility of more loss. But what came out was, "I'm scared." Of me? Of caring? Of hoping? Of building something that might get torn away like everything else has been torn away. Cole shifted carefully so he could look at her without disturbing me. "I can't promise nothing will ever hurt again," he said. "Life's too uncertain for that. But I can promise I'll never take you for granted, never assume your feelings or pressure you, and I'll wait as long as you need." Grace felt something inside her chest crack open, something that had been locked tight since Michael died, since her parents died, since loss after loss had taught her that hoping was dangerous. "I need time," she whispered. "You've got it. All the time in the world." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face into something beautiful. Grace smiled back, tears sliding down her own cheeks now. And sitting there on the sofa, with a sleeping baby between them, and a fire warming the room, and Montana winter howling outside, they began to believe that broken people might heal each other after all. Spring came to Montana the way it always does, reluctant and fierce, with snowmelt turning the roads to rivers of mud, and the first green shoots pushing through frozen earth like small acts of rebellion. Grace had been at Maverick Ranch for 3 months now, and the rhythm of the place had become as natural to her as breathing. She woke before dawn to start bread, fed the twins while biscuits baked, cooked breakfast for 7 hungry men who no longer just tolerated her presence, but had adopted her and the babies as their own. After the cowboys scattered to their work, she'd spend the morning on domestic tasks that had once exhausted her, but now gave her quiet satisfaction. But it was the evenings Grace treasured most. After supper, after the dishes were washed and put away, Cole would help her carry the twins upstairs. They'd developed a routine, the two of them working in comfortable silence to bathe Lily and Tommy, change them into night clothes, settle them in the cradle that had once held Rosie. Then they'd go back downstairs to the living room. Grace would mend or knit while Cole read aloud from whatever book he'd chosen. His voice, deep and steady, would fill the quiet house with stories of far-off places neither of them would ever see. Sometimes his reading would slow, then stop. Grace would look up to find him watching her instead of the page, his amber eyes holding something that made her heart beat faster. They hadn't spoken again about love since that night on the sofa. But it was there between them, growing like the green shoots outside, too strong now to ignore, but still fragile enough that neither wanted to risk damaging it by speaking too soon. Grace was happy. Truly, deeply happy in a way she hadn't been since before Michael died. The work was hard, the hours long, but she was building something here, not just earning wages, but creating a home, becoming part of a family that included 6 cowboys, 1 grieving rancher, and 2 babies who were thriving under Montana's big sky. She should have known it was too good to last. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in late April. Grace was in the kitchen, up to her elbows in bread dough, when she heard horses in the yard. Unusual this early. The cowboys were already out checking fence lines damaged by the spring thaw. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window. 2 riders approached the house. One she recognized as Clayton Hartwell, sitting his horse with the stiff formality of a man who spent more time at a desk than in a saddle. The other was a woman Grace had never seen before, though something about the set of her shoulders and the sharp angles of her face suggested a family resemblance. Grace's stomach tightened. Nothing good could come from Clayton Hartwell showing up at the ranch. She heard Cole's boots on the porch, then his voice, carefully neutral. "Hartwell, what brings you out here?" "Business, Maverick." Clayton's voice carried through the open window. "May we speak inside?" "We can talk right here." "It concerns Mrs. Sullivan. I'd prefer privacy." Grace's heart began to pound. She dried her hands and moved to the door, stepping out onto the porch. Both riders turned to look at her. The woman was perhaps 30, dressed in a riding habit that had cost more than Grace earned in 6 months. Her hair, dark and elaborately styled, was tucked under a hat with a feather. Her face was beautiful in a cold, sharp way, like a knife blade catching light. "Mrs. Sullivan." Clayton's voice held none of the warmth his letters had promised. "Allow me to introduce my sister, Vanessa Hartwell. She's come from Helena to discuss certain matters concerning your situation here." Vanessa's eyes swept over Grace with unconcealed disdain, over her flour-dusted apron, her work-roughened hands, her hair coming loose from its bun. "So you're the woman living in Cole Maverick's house." Vanessa's voice was cultured, Eastern-educated, designed to make Grace feel small and crude. How convenient for you that my brother's rejection left you positioned to catch an even better prospect. Cole's jaw tightened. Vanessa, you've got no call to speak to Mrs. Sullivan like that, don't I? Vanessa's gaze shifted to Cole, and something flickered in her expression. Old pain, jealousy, longing, carefully masked. I'm simply stating facts. She came here as a mail-order bride. That arrangement fell through. Within hours, she'd secured a position in your household, living under your roof, alone, unchaperoned. Some might call that remarkably opportunistic. Some might call it survival, Grace said quietly. I had 2 babies and no prospects. Mr. Maverick offered honest employment. That's hardly opportunism. Honest employment? Vanessa's laugh was brittle. Is that what we're calling it? You've been here 3 months, Mrs. Sullivan. 3 months of living in close quarters with a wealthy, grieving widower. Tell me, has your employment remained strictly professional? Grace felt heat rise in her face. I don't have to answer that. Actually, you might. Clayton spoke for the first time since the introductions. There's been talk in town about your living arrangements, about the propriety of an unmarried woman residing in a bachelor's home. The Ladies' Aid Society is quite concerned. The Ladies' Aid Society can mind their own damn business, Cole said flatly. Unfortunately, it becomes my business when it affects your mortgage. Clayton's voice took on a harder edge. You owe the bank $3,000, Maverick, final payment due in 60 days. Given certain irregularities in your arrangement with Mrs. Sullivan, the bank board is considering whether to call the note early. Silence fell like a stone. Grace saw Cole's hands curl into fists at his sides. Irregularities, he repeated. His voice dangerously quiet. What irregularities? A single woman living on premises. No proper chaperone. Questions about moral conduct that reflect poorly on anyone doing business with you. Clayton shifted in his saddle. The bank has a reputation to maintain. We can't be seen as supporting situations that violate community standards of decency. This is horseshit, and you know it. Cole's voice was hard as iron. My mortgage payments have been on time every single month for 17 years. You're using gossip as an excuse to pressure me. Pressure? Clayton raised an eyebrow. I'm simply informing you of the board's concerns. Concerns that could be alleviated if Mrs. Sullivan were to find alternative employment. Or if your situation were to be formalized through marriage, making her presence respectable. There it was, the ultimatum laid bare. Marry Grace or lose her. Either way, Clayton won. Either he forced Cole into a hasty marriage that would always carry the taint of coercion, or he drove Grace away and left Cole alone again. Grace felt sick. This was her fault. Her presence here had put Cole's ranch, the home Sarah had designed, everything he'd built over 17 years, at risk. Vanessa was watching Cole's face with sharp attention. Of course, there's a third option. The bank might be willing to extend more favorable terms if you were to consider a more suitable match. Someone of appropriate standing and character. The implication was clear. Vanessa had been in love with Cole for years. If he rejected Grace and turned to her instead, all these problems would disappear. Cole's expression could have been carved from stone. Get off my property. Cole, be reasonable. Vanessa's voice turned pleading. I'm trying to help you. This woman is beneath you. She was desperate enough to answer a mail-order bride advertisement. She has no family, no prospects, nothing but 2 illegitimate children. They're not illegitimate, Grace said, her voice shaking with anger now. And even if they were, that wouldn't make them worth less. They're children, innocent, worthy of love and protection. How touching. Vanessa's smile was cruel. Tell me, Mrs. Sullivan, do you love Cole Maverick, or do you simply love his ranch and his money? That's enough. Cole's voice cracked like a whip. Both of you, off my land, now. And you can tell your bank board that I'll have their money in 60 days, every penny, with interest. And then I'll move my business to a bank in Helena that doesn't use a man's personal life as leverage. Clayton's face darkened. You're making a mistake, Maverick. The only mistake I made was trusting your bank in the first place. Now get out before I have my men escort you out." As if summoned, Buck appeared from the barn, followed by Jake and Slim. All three carried rifles, not pointing them at anyone, but making their presence known. Clayton and Vanessa exchanged glances. Then, without another word, they turned their horses and rode away, disappearing down the muddy road toward Silver Creek. Cole stood rigid until they were out of sight. Then his shoulders sagged. $3,000, he said quietly. "I don't have it. The spring calf sales won't happen for another 2 months. I've got maybe 1,000 in the bank, but that's earmarked for supplies and wages." Grace felt her world tilting. "This is my fault. I should leave. If I'm not here, they can't use my presence against you." "No." Cole turned to her, his amber eyes fierce. "You're not going anywhere. I won't let them bully you out of your home." "It's your home, Cole. Your life's work. I won't let you lose it because of me. And I won't let them drive you away because of small-minded gossip." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "There has to be another way." Buck cleared his throat. "There might be." Both Grace and Cole turned to look at him. The old cowboy shifted his weight. "That horse race in Helena, big one, coming up in 3 weeks. $5,000 purse to the winner. You got Storm. He's the fastest horse in 3 territories. You enter him, you got a real chance of winning." Cole shook his head. "I haven't raced in 3 years, not since Sarah died." "I know, but Storm remembers. And you remember. You were the best rider I ever saw." Buck's faded eyes held steady. "We need that money, Cole, and racing's a damn sight better than begging or losing the ranch." Grace watched emotions flicker across Cole's face. Fear, resistance. Then, slowly, determination. "All right," he said finally. "We'll enter Storm in the Helena race, but that means 3 weeks of training, getting him and me both back in condition." He looked at Grace. "Can you manage things here while I'm focused on that?" "Of course." "And Grace?" His voice softened. "This isn't your fault." "None of it. Clayton's been looking for a way to hurt me for years. He's just using you as an excuse." After Cole and Buck walked toward the barn to begin Storm's training, Grace stood alone on the porch. Through the window she could hear Lily starting to fuss, waking from her morning nap. The bread dough would need shaping soon. Life went on, ordinary tasks continuing, despite the threat hanging over all of them. But Grace's mind was racing. $3,000 in 60 days. A horse race in Helena. Cole risking injury, possibly death, because she'd come into his life and made him vulnerable to gossip and manipulation. She'd fled Boston to escape poverty and give her children a chance at life. Instead, she'd brought trouble to a good man who'd shown her nothing but kindness. Grace went inside to tend to Lily, but a cold knot of fear had settled in her chest. One that wouldn't ease no matter how many times she told herself everything would be fine. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Cole worked with Storm every day, riding the big gray stallion until both horse and rider moved as one. Grace watched sometimes from the kitchen window, her heart in her throat every time Storm jumped a fence or took a turn at full gallop. The cowboys pitched in wherever Cole's absence left gaps. Red took over the morning feeding. Charlie handled the fence repairs Cole normally did himself. Even young Pete, barely 20, worked twice as hard to make up for their boss being distracted. Grace threw herself into her work with fierce determination. If Cole was risking everything to keep her here, she'd prove herself worth that risk. She cooked meals that would stick to the men's ribs through long days of labor. She mended every piece of torn clothing. She kept the house spotless. She cared for the twins and the chickens and the vegetable garden she'd started in a sunny spot near the kitchen. At night, exhausted and aching, she'd lie awake listening to the house settle around her, listening for the sound of Cole's boots on the stairs, his quiet movements in the room across the hall. 1 week before the Helena race, disaster struck. Grace was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard shouting from the barn. Male voices, urgent and frightened. She dropped the wet sheet and ran. Inside the barn, chaos. Storm was rearing and screaming, his eyes rolling white with fear and pain. Cole lay on the ground, not moving. Buck and Jake were trying to calm the horse, while Slim knelt beside Cole's motionless form. "What happened?" Grace's voice came out high and thin. "Horse got spooked by a snake," Buck said tersely, fighting to control Storm's reins. "Threw Cole into the fence rail. He ain't conscious." Grace pushed past Jake and dropped to her knees beside Cole. His face was gray, his breathing shallow. Blood seeped from a gash on his forehead. When she felt for broken bones, her hands came away wet with more blood from somewhere on his back. "Get him to the house," she ordered. "Carefully, support his head and spine." 4 cowboys lifted Cole as gently as they could and carried him to the house. Grace ran ahead, grabbing clean sheets and the medical supplies she kept in a cupboard. Her hands shook, but her mind was clear, sorting through everything her mother had taught her about treating injuries. They laid Cole on his bed. Grace sent Red for the doctor in Silver Creek, though she knew it would be hours before he arrived. In the meantime, she had to keep Cole alive. She cut away his blood-soaked shirt. The fence rail had caught him across the back, tearing a gash from shoulder blade to spine. Not deep enough to hit anything vital, thank God, but deep enough to bleed heavily. The head wound was less serious, already clotting. Grace worked with steady hands, cleaning and binding the wounds. She'd watched her mother do this 100 times for injured factory workers in Boston. Now her mother's lessons might save Cole's life. After what felt like hours, his eyes fluttered open. "Grace? Don't move. You hit your head. You're bleeding. The race." His voice was thick, slurred. "Storm. Have to train." "The hell with the race. You could have been killed." Cole tried to sit up. Grace pushed him back down with surprising strength. "You stay in this bed or I'll tie you to it," she said fiercely. "You're not dying on me, Cole Maverick. You're not leaving me alone again. I won't allow it." Something shifted in his pain-clouded eyes. Recognition. Understanding. "You love me," he whispered. Grace felt tears spill hot down her cheeks. "Yes, damn you, I love you. And if you dare die and leave me, I'll never forgive you." A smile tugged at his lips despite the pain. "Not planning on dying today." "Good. Because I haven't told you yet that I want to marry you. Not because Clayton says we should, or because it would solve your mortgage problems. Because I love you. Because you and the twins are my family. Because this ranch is my home, and I don't want to be anywhere else." Cole's hand found hers, gripped it weakly. "Is that a proposal, Mrs. Sullivan?" "It's a statement of fact. As soon as you can stand without falling over, we're getting married, assuming you'll have me." "I'd marry you today if I could walk to the church." His eyes started to drift closed. "Love you, Grace? Loved you since the train platform. I know. Sleep now. I'll be here when you wake up." She sat beside his bed, holding his hand, while outside the spring afternoon faded into evening. The twins cried and Buck brought them to her, but Grace didn't leave Cole's side. She nursed Lily and Tommy right there, one at a time, then passed them back to Buck's capable hands. When Dr. Fletcher finally arrived from Silver Creek, he examined Cole with practiced efficiency. "Concussion," he pronounced. "Nasty gash on his back, but nothing vital damaged. He'll be sore as hell for weeks, but he'll live." The old doctor looked at Grace with new respect. "You did good work here, Mrs. Sullivan. Probably saved his life, keeping that bleeding under control." After the doctor left, Grace remained at Cole's bedside through the night. She dozed in the chair, waking every hour to check his breathing and color. Near dawn, she felt his hand tighten on hers. "You're still here," he murmured. "Where else would I be? With your children, sleeping, taking care of yourself. Buck has the twins, and I'll sleep when I'm sure you're all right." She touched his forehead gently, checking for fever. "How do you feel?" "Like I was trampled by my own horse." He managed a weak smile. "But alive. Thanks to you. You're not racing in Helena." "Grace, I have to. It's the only way to raise $3,000 in time." "I don't care about the money. I care about you not getting yourself killed trying to save a ranch." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then, "It's not just about the ranch. It's about not letting Clayton win. Not letting him drive you away or force us into decisions we're not ready for." "We are ready." Grace's voice was firm. "I proposed to you yesterday. Rather poorly, I admit, but the sentiment stands. I want to marry you, Cole, not because of Clayton or the bank or town gossip, because I love you, because we're good together, because the twins need a father and you need a family, and we've already been acting like we're married for months now." Cole studied her face in the gray dawn light filtering through the window. "You're sure? You're not just saying this because you're scared or feel obligated? I'm saying it because 3 months ago I showed up at your ranch with nothing but 2 babies and a trunk full of broken dreams. You gave me a home, work that mattered, respect when everyone else saw only scandal. You let me into your grief and trusted me with Sarah and Rosie's memory. You make me laugh and you make me feel safe and you look at my children like they're precious gifts instead of burdens." Her voice broke. "When I saw you lying in that barn, I realized I couldn't bear to lose you. Not now. Not when I've just found you. So yes, I'm sure. I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. I want to grow old on this ranch and raise our children and honor the people we've lost by living fully in the present." Cole pulled her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. "Then marry me, Grace Sullivan, not because we have to, but because we want to. Not to solve problems, but because we've found something rare and precious and worth fighting for." "Yes," Grace whispered, "1,000 times yes." They sat in the quiet morning, hands clasped, while outside the ranch woke to another day. There were still problems to solve, money to raise, gossip to endure, a future to build. But they'd face it together now, not as employer and employee, or even as friends, but as partners, choosing each other deliberately, fully, without reservation. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church in Silver Creek, the same church where Grace had endured whispers and judgment, where women had turned their backs and men had looked away. But today was different. May Carson had spread the word that Grace Sullivan was marrying Cole Maverick, and anyone who had a problem with it could answer to her personally. The Ladies' Aid Society could clutch their pearls all they wanted. This wedding was happening, and the whole town was invited to witness it. To Grace's astonishment, they came, ranchers and cowboys, shopkeepers and their wives, farmers and their daughters. The church was packed, every pew filled, people standing in the back and spilling out onto the steps. Some came out of genuine goodwill, others came out of curiosity. A few came hoping to see scandal or drama, but they came. Grace stood in the church's small anteroom, wearing a dress May had altered from one of Sarah Maverick's. Ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, it fit Grace perfectly after May's expert needlework. In her hair, she wore a simple circlet of Montana wildflowers that Buck had picked that morning. The twins, now 10 months old, wore matching outfits also sewn by May. Lily's dress and Tommy's suit were made from soft blue cotton, each decorated with tiny embroidered horses. Buck would carry Lily down the aisle. May would carry Tommy. The twins would be part of this wedding, acknowledged and celebrated, not hidden away in shame. "You ready?" May asked, adjusting Grace's veil one last time. "I am." Grace's voice was steady. "More ready than I've ever been for anything." May's eyes filled with tears. "Sarah would have loved you. She'd be so happy that Cole found you, that those babies brought life back to that house." "I hope so. I'm not trying to replace her." "You're not replacing anyone, honey. You're writing a new chapter. That's different." May squeezed Grace's hand. "Now let's get you married before that stubborn man out there decides his back hurts too much and tries to postpone." Cole was indeed still recovering from his injuries. He'd spent a week in bed under Grace's watchful care before she'd allow him up, and even now he moved carefully, his back still healing. He'd missed the Helena race. Storm had run without him, ridden by Buck, and had come in third. Not enough prize money to solve their financial problems, but enough to buy them time. The mortgage question remained unanswered, but Grace had stopped worrying about it. Whatever happened, they'd face it together now. The music started. May and Buck, each carrying a twin, processed down the aisle to murmurs and soft exclamations from the congregation. Lily waved her chubby fists at the crowd. Tommy grabbed Buck's hat and tried to eat it. Laughter rippled through the church, warm and genuine. Then it was Grace's turn. She had no father to give her away, no family to stand with her, but she didn't need them. She had May, who'd shown her kindness when she was a stranger. She had Buck and the Cowboys, who'd defended her honor. She had the twins who'd given her purpose when she had nothing. And she had Cole. He stood at the altar, tall, despite the pain he must be feeling, his amber eyes locked on her as she walked down the aisle. He wore a black suit that Buck had pressed with meticulous care. His hair was neatly combed. His boots were polished, but it was his expression that made Grace's heart swell. He looked at her like she was the answer to prayers he'd stopped believing would be answered. The ceremony was simple. Pastor Williams spoke about love and loss and second chances, about how God's grace often came in unexpected packages, about how the greatest love stories weren't the ones that started perfectly, but the ones where two broken people chose to heal each other. When it came time for vows, Cole's voice was steady and clear enough for everyone to hear. "Grace Sullivan, you came into my life when I'd forgotten how to hope. You brought light into a house that had known only darkness. You loved my grief instead of fearing it. You honored my past while giving me a future. I promise to love you and your children as long as I draw breath. I promise to be worthy of the gift you've given me. I promise to spend every day earning the trust you've placed in me." Grace's turn. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. "Cole Maverick, you gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go. You gave me work that let me keep my dignity. You saw worth in me when everyone else saw only scandal. You loved my children and welcomed them into your home and your heart. I promise to honor Sarah and Rosie's memory by building something beautiful in the home they created. I promise to stand with you through whatever comes. I promise to love you not just for today, but for all our tomorrows." Pastor Williams smiled. "By the power vested in me by Montana Territory and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Cole, you may kiss your bride." Cole's kiss was gentle, mindful of the watching crowd, but full of promise for their private moments ahead. When they turned to face the congregation, cheers erupted. Even Martha Simpson, the town's self-appointed moral guardian, was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The reception took place at the ranch. May and several other women had spent the morning transforming the barn into something magical. Wildflowers hung from every beam. Tables groaned under the weight of food. A fiddler struck up a waltz, and couples began to dance in the open space between the stalls. Grace danced with Cole, moving slowly to accommodate his healing back. His arms around her felt like home, like safety, like the future she'd stopped believing she could have. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. "Deliriously. Even though we're still broke and probably losing the ranch in a few weeks?" Grace pulled back to look at him. "We'll figure it out. We always do." And somehow, impossibly, she believed it. Epilogue. The legacy. Now I need to tell you about the years that followed, about how love grows and deepens and becomes something more permanent than passion, about legacy. The mortgage crisis resolved itself in an unexpected way. 2 weeks after the wedding, a stranger rode up to the ranch. He introduced himself as James Morrison, a horse buyer from the U.S. Cavalry. He'd heard about Storm, about his speed and strength and intelligence. The cavalry was willing to pay $5,000 for him and rights to breed their mares to him twice a year. Cole nearly refused. Storm had been Sarah's special project, bred from her favorite mare. Selling him felt like betraying her memory. Grace had held his hand and said quietly, "Sarah would want you to keep the ranch. She'd understand." So Cole sold Storm to the cavalry. The $5,000 paid off the mortgage with enough left over to buy 2 new breeding mares. Clayton Hartwell's face when Cole walked into the bank with cash had been worth every moment of worry. After that, life settled into its rhythms. The first year of marriage, Grace got pregnant. Little Jacob was born the following spring, a squalling, red-faced boy who looked exactly like Cole. The twins, now toddlers, were fascinated by their new brother. Lily would pat his head gently and sing nonsense songs. Tommy would bring him toys, confused when the baby couldn't play with them yet. Cole was terrified of Jacob at first, afraid to love another child after losing Rosie. But Grace would place the baby in his arms and say firmly, "Your fear doesn't honor Rosie, your love does." Eventually, Cole learned to hold his son without fear. By the 5th year, there were 4 children. Jacob was joined by Sarah, named for Cole's first wife, with Grace's blessing. Then came Rose and Michael, named for Grace's first husband. The house Sarah had designed for a large family finally fulfilled its purpose. Rooms that had stood empty echoed with children's laughter. The kitchen Grace had admired on her first day now fed a family of 8, plus 6 cowboys who still worked the ranch. The twins grew strong and capable. By age 6, they were helping with ranch chores. Tommy could already sit a horse better than most adults. Lily had inherited her mother's gift for healing and would spend hours in the garden Grace had expanded, learning the properties of every herb. Buck aged but never retired. He was Uncle Buck to all the children, their patient teacher in everything from roping to fishing to tracking deer through the mountains. When Grace baked bread from the sourdough starter May had given her, she'd set aside a portion for Buck to take to the bunkhouse. The cowboys would tear into it like starving men, swearing it was the best bread in Montana. By year 15, the ranch had tripled in size. Cole's reputation as a horse breeder had spread. Ranchers came from 3 territories to buy Maverick horses. The cavalry contract continued, bringing steady income. Cole and Buck trained a new generation of cowboys, teaching them that a man's word was his bond and good horses were worth more than gold. Tommy, now 17, ran the breeding program. He'd inherited both Cole's eye for horseflesh and Sarah's intuitive understanding of the animals. Buyers would travel for days to deal with young Tommy Maverick, knowing his word was as good as any contract. Lily had become a teacher. Grace's school, started informally in the ranch kitchen, had grown into a proper schoolhouse built on Maverick land. 30 children from neighboring ranches came to learn reading, writing, arithmetic, and natural science from Miss Lily Maverick and her mother. Grace's reputation as an herbalist had spread too. Women came from Silver Creek and beyond seeking remedies for everything from colic to consumption. The younger children followed their own paths. Jacob, at 15, was the finest rider in 3 counties, winning prizes at every rodeo. Sarah Jr., at 13, combined her mother's practicality with her father's business sense, keeping the ranch accounts with meticulous precision. Rose and Michael, the youngest at 10 and 7, were still finding their ways, but showed promise in everything they touched. Cole, now 49, had silver threading through his hair. His back, never quite right after storm threw him, ached in cold weather. But his amber eyes were clear and bright when he looked at Grace across the dinner table, surrounded by their children. The grief that had nearly destroyed him had transformed into something gentler, memory instead of open wound. Grace at 39 had gray streaking her honey-brown hair. Her hands, roughened by years of work, could birth a foal as easily as knead bread or pen a letter. She'd written a book about herbal medicine, laboriously copied by hand and circulated among ranch women across Montana. Her knowledge had saved lives. Her teaching had educated a generation. On their 15th anniversary, Cole took Grace to the spot where the church had stood. It had burned down 5 years before and been rebuilt, larger and finer. They stood in the new churchyard as the sun set over the mountains. "Any regrets?" Cole asked. Grace thought about the girl who'd stepped off the train 15 years ago, desperate and alone with 2 babies. Thought about Clayton Hartwell's rejection, which had felt like the end of everything. "Not a single one," she said honestly. "If Clayton had married me, I'd have lived a comfortable, respectable, empty life. This life, our life, has been hard and beautiful and real." Cole pulled her close. "I love you more today than I did on our wedding day. Didn't think that was possible." "Love grows," Grace said, "like the sourdough starter. You feed it, care for it, and it becomes something that sustains generations." They stood in the fading light, 2 people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their broken plans and built something more lasting than either had dreamed possible. The years continued their steady march. By the 30th anniversary, Cole and Grace were grandparents. Tommy had married a rancher's daughter from Helena. They had 4 children who spent summers at the Maverick Ranch, learning to ride and work the way their father had. Lily had married the young doctor who'd come to Silver Creek, and their 3 children were brilliant, thoughtful, destined for universities back east. The ranch now sprawled across 10,000 acres. Storm's descendants ran in the cavalry and on ranches across the West, each bearing the Maverick brand. The school Grace and Lily ran had produced teachers and doctors and engineers who carried Montana education standards into a new century. Cole, at 64, moved slower, his back always aching now. But he still rose before dawn, still checked every horse himself, still knew every cow by sight. His hair had gone white as Montana snow. His face was deeply lined from decades of sun and wind. But his eyes, those amber eyes Grace had fallen in love with, still sparkled when he looked at her. Grace, at 54, wore her gray hair in a long braid. Her hands were twisted slightly from arthritis, making fine needlework difficult. But she could still birth babies and dispense herbal wisdom. Her school now operated year-round with 2 younger teachers helping. Her book on herbal medicine had been properly published and sold across the West. On Thanksgiving that year, 30 people gathered around the massive table in the house Sarah had designed and Grace had filled with life. Tommy and his wife with their 4 children, Lily and her husband with their 3, Jacob, now 30, with his wife and 2 babies, Sarah Jr., 28, with her husband and newborn son, Rose and Michael, still unmarried but successful in their own pursuits, 14 grandchildren, ranging from newborn to 15 years old, all bearing the Maverick name or connected to it by marriage, all learning from Cole and Grace what it meant to build something lasting. After dinner, the oldest grandchild, Tommy's daughter at 15, asked Grace to tell the story of how she met Cole. The children had heard it before, but never tired of it. Grace looked at Cole across the table, saw him nod, smiled at the memory. "I came to Montana to marry a man I'd never met," she began. "A banker named Clayton Hartwell, who'd written beautiful letters. When I arrived with your Uncle Tommy and Aunt Lily, who were just 6 months old, he took one look at us and said he didn't want children, rejected us right there at the train station in front of the whole town." The children's eyes went wide. This part always shocked them. "Then what happened?" the youngest asked. "Then your grandfather, who I'd never met before, offered me a job cooking for his ranch hands. Gave us a home when we had nowhere else to go, and slowly, over time, we fell in love." "What happened to the mean banker?" one of the middle grandchildren wanted to know. Cole spoke for the first time. "Clayton Hartwell lost his bank during the panic of '93, lost everything. Last I heard, he was working as a clerk in Helena. His sister Vanessa married a railroad man and moved to California. And your grandmother and I," Cole continued, "built this ranch together. Raised 6 children, trained dozens of cowboys, bred hundreds of horses. Your parents, all of them, learned to work hard and keep their word and treat people with respect because that's what we taught them, and now you're learning the same lessons." He looked at each grandchild in turn. "This ranch will outlast me and your grandmother. Someday, it'll be your parents' responsibility, and after that, yours. The Maverick name means something because generations of good people have lived up to it. Remember that." The evening ended with music. Tommy's oldest boy played fiddle while others danced. Grace sat in her rocking chair, watching her family move through the house that had once echoed with emptiness. Cole sat beside her, their hands clasped, their hearts full. The final years came gently, as they deserved. At 70, Grace finally retired from active teaching, though young mothers still came for her herbal wisdom. Her book had gone through 3 printings. A medical school in Chicago had invited her to lecture, but she'd declined. Her place was here, in Montana, on the ranch she and Cole had built. Cole at 80 still rose with the sun, though he no longer worked the horses himself. He'd sit on the porch in a rocking chair Tommy had made him, watching the ranch operations with the keen eye of a lifetime's experience. When something wasn't right, he'd call out corrections in a voice that still commanded respect, despite its age-weakened quaver. At 84 and 74 respectively, they were the oldest couple in 3 counties, married for 50 years, 6 children, 32 grandchildren, and 18 great-grandchildren who called the ranch home or visited regularly. Their bodies betrayed them with the 1,000 small failures of age. Cole's back, injured all those years ago, required a cane now. Grace's hands shook, making even simple tasks difficult. Their hearing was poor, their eyes were dim. But their minds stayed sharp, and their love never wavered. On their 50th anniversary, the whole family gathered. All 6 children, grown now into middle age themselves. All 32 grandchildren, the oldest now 30. And the great-grandchildren, too many to count, running through the house like Grace and Cole's original children had done decades before. May Carson, impossibly still alive at 95, came from Silver Creek. Buck at 93 presided over the festivities like the patriarch he'd become. 50 years, Buck said in his toast that evening. I've known these two since the day Grace stepped off that train with nothing but hope and grit. Watch them build all this. He gestured at the gathering. Ain't many marriages last 50 years, fewer still that stay strong and true. These two right here, they're what love looks like when you do it right. Everyone raised their glasses. 50 voices, 3 generations, united in celebration. Cole stood shakily, using his cane for support. I was a broken man when Grace came into my life, lost my wife and child, and thought I'd never feel anything again. Then this woman showed up, refused to cry despite her world falling apart, and taught me that hearts can heal if you're brave enough to try. He looked at Grace, tears running down his weathered face. I've loved you for 50 years. Loved watching you become a mother to our children, a teacher to hundreds, a healer to thousands. You made this ranch a home. You made my life worth living. And if I could go back to that day at the train platform and do it all again, I wouldn't change a single moment. Grace couldn't stand without help, so she stayed seated, but her voice carried clear and strong. Cole Maverick, you saved my life the day you offered me honest work instead of charity. You gave my children a father and me a partner. We've had 50 years of laughter and tears, triumphs and heartbreaks. We've buried friends and welcomed babies. We've worked until our bodies ached and loved until our hearts overflowed. And I'd do it all again, every single moment. The party continued late into the night. But eventually the grandchildren were put to bed. The children returned to their own homes. The great-grandchildren fell asleep in piles on sofas and floors. Cole and Grace sat on their porch watching the Montana stars wheel overhead. The same stars they'd watched for 50 years. The same wind that carried the scent of sage and horses and home. Tired? Cole asked. Always tired these days. Grace leaned against his shoulder, but content. Good life? The best life. Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was that scared girl with 2 babies and no prospects. They sat in comfortable silence, the silence of people who'd said everything that needed saying and were content just to be together. 2 months later, on a spring morning that smelled of new grass and wild flowers, Cole went to sleep in his rocking chair on the porch and didn't wake up. He died at 86, surrounded by the ranch he'd built and the family he'd created. Tommy found him there peaceful, a slight smile on his weathered face. Grace knew the moment he was gone. She'd been in the kitchen, making bread from the sourdough starter that was now nearly 70 years old. Her hands, shaking with age and arthritis, had been working the dough when she felt something shift in the world, some essential connection broken. She walked out to the porch and saw Tommy kneeling beside his stepfather's chair, knew without asking. "He's gone," Tommy said, his voice breaking. "Just went to sleep." Grace touched Cole's still warm cheek, bent and kissed his forehead. "Wait for me," she whispered. "I won't be long." She lived exactly 2 months after Cole died, not from any specific illness, just from the simple fact that her heart couldn't beat properly without his heart beating somewhere nearby. On a morning in late July, Grace Sullivan Maverick went to sleep in the rocking chair Cole had died in and simply didn't wake up. She was 76 years old. She died with her hands folded over a photo of Cole, smiling at peace. They buried her beside him in the Maverick family plot, on a hillside overlooking the ranch they'd built together. Her grave was next to his, just as their lives had been intertwined for 50 years. Nearby were the graves of Sarah and Rosie, Cole's first family, honored and remembered, but no longer casting shadows. The funeral brought everyone, all 6 children now ranging from 59 to 43, all 32 grandchildren, all 18 great-grandchildren plus 10 more born since the anniversary. 3 generations, 66 people who existed because Grace Sullivan had stepped off a train one November day and Cole Maverick had seen past scandal to the worth beneath. Tommy, now 72 himself, stood at the graveside and spoke. "My mother came to Montana with nothing. She'd lost everything: husband, parents, siblings, home. She answered an advertisement hoping to give me and my sister a chance at life. The man who'd promised her security rejected her the moment he saw she had children." His voice was steady despite his tears. "Then a stranger offered her work. Not marriage, not romance, just honest employment. My mother took that job and proved herself through labor. She cooked and cleaned and healed and taught. She earned her place in this family and this community." Tommy looked out at the gathering. "She married my stepfather not because she had to, but because she chose to. They built this ranch together, raised 6 children, helped raise 32 grandchildren, touched the lives of hundreds through her teaching and healing. And she did it all with grace and dignity and quiet strength." He paused, composing himself. "She used to tell us that the sourdough starter May gave her was like love. You feed it, care for it, and it sustains generations. That starter is 70 years old now, and my mother's love sustains all of us. Every person standing here exists because she had the courage to step off that train and the strength to build something beautiful from rejection and loss." The family buried Grace beside Cole. They planted wild flowers on the graves, the Montana roses Grace had loved. And they went back to the ranch house and ate food prepared from her recipes, using techniques she taught them, maintaining the traditions she'd established. 2 years after Grace died, Tommy gathered the family again. All 6 of Cole and Grace's children, now even older, the grandchildren, many with children of their own, the great-grandchildren, some already teenagers, and now a few great-great-grandchildren, the newest generation. 93 people descended from or connected to Cole Maverick and Grace Sullivan. 93 people who called the Maverick Ranch part of their heritage. Tommy, at 74, stood on the porch of the house his grandmother Sarah had designed and his mother Grace had filled with life. "I'm too old to run this ranch," he announced. "It's time to pass it on." He looked at his oldest son, now 46, who'd spent his entire life learning the business. "The ranch is yours, but it comes with responsibilities. You maintain the school your grandmother started. You honor the contracts your grandfather established. You keep training good cowboys and breeding good horses. You remember where we came from." His son nodded solemnly. "I will. I promise." Tommy held up a glass jar. Inside, the sourdough starter bubbled gently, alive after 70 years. "This starter was given to your grandmother Grace by May Carson when she first came to Montana in 1885. It's been feeding this family for over 70 years now. May's mother brought it from Pennsylvania back in 1845, so the starter itself is over 100 years old. May's mother brought it from Pennsylvania back in 1845, so the starter itself is over 100 years old. Every week someone tends it, feeds it, keeps it alive." He looked out at the assembled family. "That's what we do. We tend what was given to us. We feed it with our labor and love. And we pass it on to the next generation, stronger than we received it. That's the Maverick legacy. Not money or land or horses. It's this: family, continuity, love that sustains." He began dividing the starter, giving a portion to each of his children, his grandchildren, everyone who wanted a piece of this living connection to the woman who'd started it all. "Take this home," Tommy said. "Feed it. Use it. Make bread for your families. And when you do, remember Grace Sullivan, who came to Montana with 2 babies and nothing else. Remember Cole Maverick, who saw worth where others saw scandal. Remember that love grows when you tend it. Remember that the best legacies aren't the ones you inherit, but the ones you create." 93 people took their portions of sourdough starter home to ranches and cities and towns across the West. And wherever they went, they carried with them the story of a mail-order bride rejected at a train platform and a grieving rancher who offered her work, and how those 2 broken people healed each other and built something that would outlast them both by generations. That's how love works, friends. That's how legacy is built. Not through perfection, but through choosing each other every day despite the imperfections. Not through easy paths, but through hard work and faith that tomorrow will be better than today. Grace Sullivan. Maverick lived 76 years. For 50 of them, she was married to Cole Maverick. Together they raised 6 children, influenced 66 descendants, and touched thousands of lives through teaching and healing and simple human kindness. She died in a rocking chair, smiling, at peace, knowing her life had mattered. And somewhere, in a kitchen across Montana and beyond, someone makes bread from a 70-year-old sourdough starter and remembers the woman who taught them that love, like bread, rises when you give it time and care. That's the story. That's the legacy. Pull up a chair, friend, and remember, the worst day of your life might just be the beginning of your best days yet.